Hi everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Hi Richard.
How are you?
Hi.
Good. Hi Pauline.
Hi.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, guys, for coming on board. Because it's already 8, we'll start at exactly 8:05. So in 1 minute we should be starting. But I'll just like to let you know our presenters today. We have Belly Julians. She's our moderator. Belly, say hi.
Hi.
Hi. And we have Dr. Boatiu Gang, who's going to be our presenter today. And I believe she'll give you all the details about the association she is affiliated to and also her titles in the due course of our discussion. So karibuni sana, and feel like we're going to learn something. Our topic today is anxiety disorders, depression during COVID-19. And I am so excited. Like, I'm super excited we're having this conversation because there's been a lot of conversations going on about how people are feeling uncomfortable, how people are having racing hearts, how people are just having lots of things going on during COVID-19. So our presenter is going to give us all the details today, and we also have the mental health team that is going to answer most of those questions. So I just want to welcome Belly to start us off and just feel at home, just enjoy the discussion. I'll be doing the sign language interpretation today. Yes, Karibu Belly.
Okay, thank you very much, Safi. Hi everyone.
Hey.
Hi.
I hope all our microphones have been muted so that we can be following to avoid the background noise. So everyone kindly mute your microphones. Yes. Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to let the presenters for today to introduce themselves. I'll start with Dr. Piatsum. I hope I got the name right. Doctor, kindly say hi and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening from Nigeria. I am Dr. Watium Anagyang. I'm a psychiatrist working in North Central Nigeria. I am actually a member of the Association of Psychiatrists in Nigeria. I'm also the team lead for Youth Suicide Prevention and Response Team. That's the hospital I work for in Jos, Central Nigeria. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We are glad to have you on board, and I know we are going to learn a lot of things from you. Welcome. And the other list, Ami, is Ami in? Ami Zinzi? I can see Pauline. Pauline, say hi to us and introduce yourself. You can unmute and then you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Belly, and the team. Thank you so much. I'm Pauline Kimonda. I'm a medical psychologist, a colleague to Aflin Tafi, and I'm glad to be here. It's a great initiative. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pauline. Welcome. I know we are going to learn a lot from you. We also have Sydney. Is Sydney in? Sydney? Oh, she has not yet joined us. How about Maureen? Yeah, so maybe when they join us, we'll let them introduce themselves. So guys, welcome. And I think we are going to start off. And I'll welcome Dr. Biatsum to kindly tell us, to define what depression and anxiety disorder is so that we can all get to understand and demystify all the myths that we've heard about it. So Doctor, welcome, and define for us depression and anxiety disorder.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share. So, depression is actually a mood disorder, and when we talk about mood disorders, we just mean a disorder that affects the way we feel. So basically, it is a disorder that affects the way we feel, and it usually presents with cardinal symptoms, which are feeling of sadness. And I must say here that, it's normal to feel sad, and sadness is not equal to depression. When negative things happen to us, we feel sad, but we're able to bounce out of it. But when a person is depressed, sometimes people mistaken them, for the same thing. But sadness can be a symptom in depression, and the sadness that is a symptom in depression is such that it does not respond, to external events that are supposed to be pleasurable. It is persistent and pervasive most times of the day, for days and weeks on end. You can also have, loss of interest in things that one used to enjoy, and then low energy. Now, other symptoms that come with depression include a sense of helplessness, a sense of hopelessness, a sense of worthlessness, poor concentration, and for those who are married, they can begin to have low libido. They can also have thoughts of suicide, and even the suicidal acts. Sometimes suicide can be a symptom of depression, just like you have headache and malaria. Then I would also add here that, um, depression sometimes does not present very classically like that. Sometimes it presents with, instead of a person having the usual symptoms, it can present with a lot of somatic symptoms. And when we say somatic symptoms, we just mean bodily symptoms. So a person is depressed, and instead of saying that he is sad and having all those classical symptoms, the person begins to have headache today, tomorrow is backache, next tomorrow is stomach pain, and things like that. So a lot of times for us Africans, most especially, depression can be missed as physical illnesses. I have seen people who have had surgeries, who have had a lot of invasive procedures without any relief because they had to talk about depression. I tell people that when you see yourself beginning to come down with little infections like malaria, in Nigeria, typhoid, common cold, backache, symptoms that you just keep going to the hospital back and forth. Sometimes you do investigations and they tell you there is no problem. It might be a sign that one has depression. And depression, as we know, is one of the common, in fact, is the common, try to bring it down with some examples. And I say things like, imagine yourself being in, maybe about to face an examination for the very first time, an examination that will define the course of your life. Imagine yourself probably in an emergency room or in an emergency theater with your loved one who had an accident and is in the theater. You're not sure if he's going to survive or not. Imagine the tension, imagine the apprehension, imagine the fear, imagine the worry, imagine the sweatiness from time to time. Now, that is what anxiety disorder feels like. Now, anxiety disorder, it stems from like the body being in overdrive. It's okay to feel afraid from time to time as human beings, but when a person stays afraid, that is where the problem is. When a person is afraid, even when the source or the source of threat is not there, that is where the problem is. So you can say that anxiety can be they present broadly in three categories. You have the generalized anxiety disorder, in which all these things that I mentioned, are there, but they are there almost all through the day for most days. So a person is just unusually tense, unusually worried, unusually fearful, unusually apprehensive, and uneasy. Now, that is generalized anxiety disorder. One can also have what we call panic disorder, where you have panic attacks. So a person is okay, and then after a while, sometimes for no reason, you just have bouts of feeling your heartbeat racing and beating very fast, feeling maybe a knot in the tummy, having to run to the toilet to pass stool because of diarrhea, sweating, having tremors, that is the body shaking, having dry mouth. Sometimes people even vomit, and then because of the hyperventilation, the person feels as if the air is not enough, and so he's panting for air. Sometimes people can actually collapse, and it can lead to fainting and sometimes even frank convulsions. That's what panic attack looks like. So panic attack is episodic. It comes in from time to time, and in between, the person is normal. Then the other variant of anxiety disorder is what we call the obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, for obsessive compulsive disorder, a person has repetitive, intrusive thoughts, in that are usually unpleasurable. The person knows that these thoughts are his own and they are baseless, and tries to push them out of the mind, but then it's repetitive, it keeps coming back. Now, that is the obsessive component of obsessive compulsive disorder. Then the person now begins to have, rituals that follows these thoughts, which helps to allay the person's anxiety and tension for a while. So these rituals can come in different forms depending on the obsessive thoughts that the person has. For example, in this era of COVID-19, a person can have these repetitive thoughts of being infected. And so when the person is not sure, am I infected? Am I not infected? The thought keeps coming to the person's mind. It now leads to a compulsive act of washing. So a person goes, washes the hand, feels better. After a while, I might be infected again, even though I have not really touched anything or come in contact with anyone. And the person keeps washing. And so that is the compulsive aspect. So a person can have either the obsessions alone or the obsessions and compulsions occurring at the same time, which is the obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, I don't know whether I need to pause here for further maybe directions on how to go. But in a nutshell, this is when we say depression, we mean a disorder that affects the way we feel. And it comes with several symptoms that a lot of them occurs in our minds, thinking affecting the way we view ourselves, the way we view the world, the way we view the future. And then anxiety is generally fear that is there in the absence of a threat, or even long after the threat has been removed, a person remains fearful. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We are learning a lot. And anyone who has come in, thank you for coming in. And I would request that the moment you get in, just mute your microphone. There's a time that we are going to allow you to talk, to give you an opportunity to ask questions, and also to to comment on anything that you'd like to say. So if you came in late, what doctor has talked about, she has defined depression, and she says depression affects how we feel. It generally deals with our feelings, and anxiety disorder is the fear or the absence of is it the fear of threat, or you're having a threat. The doctor will explain more. So those are what you have discussed, and she has also told us about 3 types of anxiety disorder. That is, there's the generalized anxiety disorder, the panic disorder, and also obsessive compulsive disorder. And doctor, before you start talking about signs and symptoms, there's one thing I really want you to clarify, especially on the obsessive compulsive disorder. We find that most people do suffer from it, and yet they don't know, especially now that you've given an example about people who wash their hands. We find that some people, they are just so clean, so orderly. If they see any dirty thing, they feel like peeing or something. How can you diagnose somebody with OCD?
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, as I explained earlier, you have the obsessive thoughts and then the compulsive actions. Now, to make a diagnosis of OCD, the person must have had it for a while, at least a few months, minimum of 3 months. And usually, these thoughts, for all of us, we have ways in which we prefer things to be done in life. But then, when things are not done that way, we are not usually in distress, or it does not affect our functioning. But a person with obsessive compulsive disorder, once these thoughts are there and this ritual starts occurring, it disrupts functioning. That's the that is the crossing, or that's the defining line. A person who is just, some people can have what we call obsessive personalities, in which in which they are they just like order. They like things to be done in particular ways. They love to be neat. But usually it will not affect functioning. Usually it will not affect relationship with one another. But let me give you an example. I used to live close to a neighbor whom house helps could not enter the kitchen until they took their bath. So they wake up at 5 a.m. and they're in the bathroom. So they have to take their bath, they enter the kitchen. She was so obsessed about dirt and germs that her children could not play with other people. People could not visit her because once you visit her sitting room, you sit on the sofa. As soon as you get up, she is, in fact, before you leave, she is already sweeping and dusting the chair you sat on. So it affected the relationship between her and the neighbors, in the sense that they didn't like to come to their house, and she couldn't visit people, freely, because of the fear of contamination. And so, whenever you have this that is beginning to affect function or relationships, or it's even making you uncomfortable, then it is a disorder, and it is a clinical entity that needs that one needs help with. I also have a very good example about someone recently in Nigeria, in fact, where I stay. I learned that since the onset of coronavirus in March, he hasn't stepped out of his gates. His whole family have not stepped out of the gates because of fear of contamination. And when they need foodstuff, well, he's a bit well to do, so he makes calls. And when people bring it to his gate, he doesn't allow them to come in. They have to drop it outside. And, he waits for a time, sends the security guard to pick it, bring it in, they sun dry it, and things like that. So when it begins to affect
Thank you. Now I understand. When it begins to affect your functioning, now it becomes a disorder. Thank you so much, doctor. I think all of us are learning, and we'll move on. You'll be giving us signs and symptoms. I know you had brushed through, but you can list them again. The signs and symptoms of depression and also anxiety disorder. You just brushed through them again.
Yeah. Okay. So very quickly, I would say that a person who is depressed usually feels sad a lot of times for no reason. Sometimes there might be a reason, but you agree with me that if a person goes to a house, even if you lose someone, you sit down, you're crying, you're sad. If people are able to, well, if people come around you, sometimes they crack jokes, you feel better, you're able to smile. But a person who is depressed has pervasive sadness that is with him all the time, cannot respond even when good things happen. Feelings of low energy. At the early stages of depression, a person might be able to go through with his work, but would need to put more effort. Or a person goes to work at 8 a.m. and by 12, the person feels exhausted. That might be a sign that depression is coming in. Then the person begins to lose interest in things that are formerly pleasurable. For example, a person who loves to watch movies suddenly find out that movies are no longer so interesting. A person who loves to go to church, discovers that he no longer finds pleasure in singing, in communicating or in communing with God in church, it might be a sign. And a lot of times for religious people, they take it as the person is backsliding or the person is having some spiritual issues and that's why he's leaving church. But then it is just because of a symptom of depression, which is loss of interest in something that the person usually enjoys. Depression can lead to poor concentration, and poor concentration can present as making a lot of mistakes at work. It might mean for a housewife dropping things, plates, forgetting to put salt, allowing food to burn on fire. If it keeps happening repetitively, it might be a sign that there is poor concentration. It can lead to a loss in libido, a married person not being sexually attracted or wanting to have any sexual relationship with the husband or the wife. It can lead to a feeling of worthlessness where the person begins to wonder, am I really useful? Am I contributing anything? And if not taken care of, it can progress to a sense of hopelessness where the person feels that there is nothing left for the person in the world, nothing I do is going to bring results. And then suicidal thoughts and ideas can begin to set in, and even the suicidal act in extreme of cases. And I mentioned earlier that depression, a lot of times, especially in Africans, because we are not too psychologically minded, and a lot of times, the body doesn't know, the mind doesn't know how to communicate the distress in a way that people would understand. And so we present more with what we call somatic symptoms or physical symptoms. So a person presents with symptoms that the doctors find it very difficult to comprehend, symptoms that you go to the labs and they test without finding anything very significant happening to you. A person has headache, fever, people say things are crawling on my body, I feel my back, there is back pain, sometimes they say it's ulcer. And depression, because it can actually affect the person's immunity, can make the person very prone to developing minor illnesses like colds, catarrh, cough, and a host of other infections. So a lot of times when you get yourself having a lot of infections, within a short period of time, or recurrent infections or recurrent symptoms without really knowing what is wrong, it will be good for you to screen yourself for depression. Because a lot of times, if we don't handle that, the person never really gets well. So in a nutshell, those are the symptoms of depression.
Oh, thanks so much, doctor. So before we go to our next topic of what actions we need to take when you see these, when you realize that you have these signs and symptoms, I really want you to talk a little bit about suicide. We find that nowadays we have a lot of suicidal cases, mostly in young people and old people. And I don't know, how is suicide related to depression, or why do most people who are depressed just think of taking away their lives, and how can we help them? Because usually they always speak up. First of all, you'll find somebody writing on their Facebook wall, or they're just texting people, I'm going to kill myself, I want to do this. How do we handle such cases? Most of the time we tend to laugh at them and say maybe they're looking for sympathy, or they're looking for attention, but deep down these people really need help, but we don't know how to help them. So how can we go about that?
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Suicide usually is defined as any act with fatal outcome carried out by an individual in expectation of the fatal outcome. Now, it simply means that there is an act that is capable of taking my life, and I carry it out, knowing fully well that it can end my life. And at the point at which I was carrying out this act, I actually intend to die. That is suicide. Now, if I die, it's completed suicide. If I don't die, but I had the intent, we call it attempted suicide. Now, if the intent is not there, regardless of whether the patient died or not, technically it is called deliberate self-harm. Now, the thing about it is that suicide generally has been rising, has been increasing globally. And unfortunately for us, the developing countries accounts for more than half of the suicides, that are carried out each year. And I'm not sure for where Kenya lies, but then in Nigeria, I think at the last count in 2018, we were number 5 or so on the global index, with accounting for about 15,000 of out of every 100,000 deaths. And I'm sure if you follow the trend for your countries, as for us in the developing world, you find out that the rates are much higher. And the thing about suicide, unfortunately, as you said, is that most research has shown that most people that die by suicide must have communicated their distress in one way or the other. But then, unfortunately, because of the misconceptions that we have about suicide in the country or in the region generally, people find it very difficult to express, or people even when they express it, people find it difficult to understand because of several of the misconceptions. Part of the misconception include we think that they might be joking, they're unserious people. We feel that it's something that people can get a grip, of themselves about, or they just need spiritual help. They might be possessed by evil. I attended a meeting somewhere and we were talking, and someone kept an insecticide that we were looking for, and it was actually a children's camp. And the leader came and looked for it, didn't find, and just screamed, "Oh, these demons of suicide that are hovering everywhere." And so a lot of people look at it as a kind of demonic attack, and so we do not respond to it adequately. Now, when you think about depression and suicide, depression, from the symptoms, I talked about a sense of worthlessness, which progresses to a sense of helplessness, then hopelessness, and then suicidal. So it's usually in a spectrum that if you don't take care of, it can lead all the way to suicide. Now, also, when you look at the talking a little maybe about biology, usually there are some neurochemicals. We have chemicals in our brain. Let me explain it in just very simple terms, because I believe not all of us are medically inclined. We have chemicals in our brains that are responsible for the way we think, feel, and behave. And sometimes these chemicals can go out of balance. And one of the neurochemicals that is implicated in depression is what we call serotonin. Don't mind the name, but just know that there is a chemical that is usually deficient. And this same chemical has been found to be deficient in people that are suicidal, or those that die by. So you see that it's really very closely linked. And as I said earlier on, suicide can be just a symptom in depression. Just like when you have malaria, you can have headache or abdominal pain that you cannot help. A person who is sufficiently depressed cannot help the thought about suicide. Sometimes even the act of killing him or herself, the person cannot really help it. Now, how to help? As you said earlier on, for us, the experience we had is when we started the Youth Suicide Response Prevention and Response Team, we started with helplines. We got phones that people could call in 247, and we responded. Then we realized that young people these days don't even want to talk. I got a call from someone that was several kilometers away from me. And I asked if I should refer her to psychiatrist or psychologist over where she left. And she said, no, she wants to discuss with me. So I was like, okay, can we talk on phone? Can I call you? She said, no, she preferred to chat. So you see that young people are more and more wanting to chat. They prefer their Facebooks, Twitters, WhatsApp. So people really communicate their distress. Young people communicate their distress these days mostly on social media. Now, the thing about social media that is a bit of a disadvantage is the anonymity in social media. So there is this feeling of not being responsible for what people put on there. So people pass a lot of comments, probably because you're not seen, you don't really, people don't know you, or it confers you with a false sense of anonymity. So people are harsh to one another, people criticize one another. People say things like, I am hopeless, I want to die, or I feel like ending it all. And someone is responding to the person saying things like, well, you could go ahead. Well, insecticide is just 250 naira using Nigerian currency now. So people say things like that, and you push these people further to the helplessness or the hopelessness. And then for someone who was just contemplating, sometimes because of our poor responses, they go ahead and do that. Sometimes we say things like, well, let's pray. When you dismiss the person, when you say things like, it is well with you, brother, in the Christendom, it is like a language that people like so much in my part of the world. And it is something that people say probably as a sign of faith or something, but it's actually dismissive. When someone tells you he or she is in distress and you just say, it is well, brother, you have actually dismissed the person. You have told the person that whatever is wrong with you is not worth discussing. Just trust God. And I'm a believer, I believe in trusting God. However, if there are real life issues, they should be attended to. Another thing that can help us is let's validate people's pain. Let's validate people's experiences. For the fact that something is an issue to a person and it's not an issue to me doesn't make it less of an issue. So if, for example, someone decides or someone feels suicidal because his boyfriend or his girlfriend or her boyfriend left her, I shouldn't say things like, well, I was jilted on my wedding day and I didn't die, so just look at it, or emulate me, or if I didn't do it, you shouldn't do it. We are all different. Let's validate the fact that this person is having problems because the boyfriend left him or her. Let us also approach the issue with caution. If you don't know what to do, it is better to just point the person to a source of help than complicate the person's problems. Now, it is also very helpful that if a person communicates signs of distress, or you're not sure if the person is suicidal or not, that you ask the person direct questions. There is no point beating around the bush. Sometimes we feel as if we ask about suicide, we might be planting seeds of suicide in the minds of a person who is not usually who might not think about that. But research has shown consistently that asking a person directly about suicide does not actually plant any seed of suicide in the person, but it might give the person an opportunity to talk about things. From my experience, people really want to talk if they see that there is someone that understands them. If there is someone that will not judge them, if there is someone that will not look at them as a total failure or as a weak person spiritually or as someone who is demon possessed, people are willing to talk. And, even for us as doctors, research has shown that over 40% of people that die by suicide have visited their GPs or have visited their doctors within the last month before the suicidal act itself. And
Interrupt you. Can I interrupt you a little bit?
okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah. There are people who usually talk, and then there are these people that they don't talk, they don't tell you anything. You don't even know what's going on. You just see them and you realize there's a problem, but you try talking to them, they don't tell you. How can we handle such a person?
Okay. Well, in some suggestions, but I would need to say here that even to the best best of psychiatrists and psychologists, it is sometimes not possible to predict accurately or with 100% of accuracy who would die by suicide and who will not. So sometimes we even miss. I have made that mistakes before, and I'm not ashamed, to admit it. I had a patient who came in and was complaining bitterly about something and the fact that she couldn't sleep and several things. And at that point, when I did a suicidal assessment risk, I thought that she had low risk, so I allowed her go home. And the very next day, this woman took rat poison. Thankfully, she did not die, but I really felt bad about it. So I'm just saying this, to let you know that sometimes you might not be able to predict accurately. But then sometimes there are some warning signs, for a person who was very boisterous, outgoing, suddenly withdrawing to him or herself, a person putting, acts together, for example, a man who has depression suddenly goes to pay school fees for his child, maybe for the next 1 or 2 years, try to settle things, become excessively nice, asking people for forgiveness, things like that should actually make us suspicious. Now, as I said earlier on, you approach the issue directly, nicely, calmly, and non-judgmentally. Now, if the person is unwilling to talk, at that point, you tell the person help is available. You are ready to talk to him or her anytime that he or she is willing to talk, and you can drop a contact. If you know people who are closer, that's in case you are not really living with the person, you can alert 1 or 2 persons that are very close to keep an eye, because there is actually an extent to which you can talk about things with people. You can't, people still have their rights to autonomy. So you cannot invade a person. So all you do is show that you care. I'm willing to listen. And I know that there are people that have gone through this and have been able to come out of it. And I know you can. So if you're willing to talk, please, you can reach me on so number. You can get to me this way or that way, and then let other people know. I think that would be my advice to a person who really doesn't want to talk. Yeah.
Oh, sure. You've already even answered the next question that we wanted you to talk about. Like, what now after you realize that you have these symptoms and you've gone to what action should you take next? Because all these symptoms, we know them. And if you're somebody who is learned, you can tell like, hey, something is wrong. I'm getting a depression. So I would like you to talk about after knowing these symptoms and trying to realize you need help, what action should you take? And after taking those actions, maybe the doctors diagnosed you that you are depressed or you have an anxiety disorder. How do you manage it? So you can combine the two, the actions to take and how to manage the disorders.
Yeah. I think the most important thing here is that don't attempt to treat yourself. Even if you are a doctor or a psychologist, if you realize that you have these symptoms, please submit yourself to another person for treatment. One of the greatest, if you look at suicide, you discover that one of the populations that are high at risk are hospital workers, sometimes even psychiatrists. And the reason is simple: we think we can help ourselves. But nature has not made it like that. If you are ill, you need to seek help. Now, seeking help might mean, depending on how severe your symptoms are, it might mean talking to a friend. It might mean knowing that there is a counselor here whom I can trust. There is a psychologist here whom I can trust. There is an older person here. There is a friend here. There is a family member here. One thing that you can't afford to do is keeping quiet and assuming that you can walk through it. That's one of the mistakes that people have made, and eventually they have taken their lives. I had a very bad case earlier this year of a lady who was going through domestic violence. And, she kept trying. She tried option A, option B. She solved the problem until a point came that she actually ended her life. And it was very painful for everybody. So if you assume that you can take care of yourself, that's going to be mistake number one. Number two, when you do not feel ashamed, once you have just realize that several people are going through, in fact, currently in the world, about 4 in 10 people are going through some form of depression, depending on, the severity. So people are going through depression. You are not alone. Know that help is available, and then take the action by talking with someone. Sometimes people get depressed because they have some pressing issues that they don't even know how to get out of. Just listening to another perspective about your problem might be enough, to pull you out of that problem. Now, for management of depression and anxiety, a lot of times mild to moderate cases might just be resolved by psychotherapy. That is treatment given by psychologists. But when the symptoms are moderate to severe, a lot of times research has shown that a combination of medication, that is drugs, and psychotherapy is more beneficial than psychotherapy alone. I think people should learn to go to the hospital. In the part of the world where I live, people find it difficult to visit psychiatrists. They associate psychiatry with madness, with insanity and things like that. So they feel ashamed. But then it is not a thing of shame. I wrote somewhere earlier that it is a sign of strength when you realize that you have a problem, and it is greater strength when you accept help for your problem. Now, sometimes, especially for anxiety disorders, teaching people, learning how to cope with your fears, learning that these your fears might not be founded on any concrete basis or any concrete thing, knowing that this fear is actually not rational for now, is enough to set you on the path of recovery. But most of the time, I believe, and most psychiatrists, most psychologists would say, do not attempt to help yourself at home. Try to speak with someone, get professional help. It will make the journey easier and shorter for you, to deal with. Another mistake that people do that we shouldn't do is trying to self-treat with maybe alcohol, because people would take alcohol to be able to sleep, to be able to get calm, and things like that. That is also wrong. Or sleeping pills, because once you start taking sleeping pills, it's just a matter of time. The body gets tolerant to it, and you will need higher doses to cope. And before long, you will become resistant, and it makes it very difficult, to have yourself treated. But then there are other things that you can do while you are receiving your treatment. And I believe that during psychotherapy or in the hospital, they will tell you things like you need to exercise, create a routine. Exercise is very good. Apart from exercise is not just for weight loss. Exercise has been found to secrete in the brain some chemicals. We call them happy hormones. They are called endorphins. But then, as I said earlier, I just forget about the names. But there are happy hormones that get secreted in our brains when we exercise, which helps us to feel better about ourselves, increases our sense of well-being, our emotional health. So it's good to exercise. It is also good to develop hobbies, at the time that you don't feel like doing anything, you lose interest in things. That's when to push yourself to go out. Try to go out even when you don't enjoy it. Try to do something that you do just for fun. It's very helpful. And I'm sure, I don't really have time right now to tell you about what gardening did to me, in terms of lifting my mood and increasing my overall sense of well-being. I'm not saying that everybody go and garden, but then these are things that can actually improve your sense of well-being. Eating right, and there are some diets that have actually been found to be stressogenic. High sugar, excessive sugar, excessive carbohydrate intake is actually stressogenic to us. So part of our well-being will mean that we also eat right. Drink a lot of water, eat vegetables and fruits, limit your carbohydrate intake. All these things help, us in the fight against depression. Also, as interesting as this might sound, doing things for other people actually helps our depression when we are depressed. Looking at life beyond yourself. So when you're feeling low and everything, you can actually think about what will I do for the next person, and doing that also secrete those happy hormones that I talked about. So apart from getting help, I think we can do some of these things, to help us feel better, cope with our depression and anxiety.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I'm learning a lot, and I hope all of us, we are still, keep on, we are almost done. And one thing that has caught my eye is the way Doctor has said that we should validate people's feelings. In as much as we don't understand what they're going through or what they're experiencing, let us learn to validate people's feelings and let us not put them off. Another great thing here is social media, the way we use social media. Most people usually commit suicide after the comments that they find on social media. When we leave this place, I'm urging all of us, like, let us be our brother's keepers. Let us learn to be good people. Let us send positive vibes. If we see somebody reaching out or somebody is in needs, is in a distress call, let us send them good vibes. Let us not be the people who push people to the very core until they kill themselves. And then the best one is we should not treat ourselves. Because actually, most of us, we just go online, search symptoms, and then look for the drugs online. I think this is a really good discussion, and we are learning a lot. So, guys, just hold on. There'll be a question and answer session at the end of this all. But as we are giving now, Doctor will be talking about her last point, like right now during this pandemic, we know that most of these people who are having depression and anxiety disorders, they're at high risk. And Doctor will explain how these patients are at risk and how we can help them. After that, we'll have Amy, Pauline, Sydney, and Maureen. If they're on, they'll be telling us what we need to do, and then we'll close with a Q&A session. So just hang on. So Dr. I'll welcome you once more to tell us how these patients, people with depression and anxiety disorder, are at risk during this COVID-19 period. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you very much. I think sometimes when you think about people who are living with anxiety and depression, looking at yourself right now can help you to put, them in perspective. You can imagine that even for you, there is this feeling of uncertainty. For me, I have to go to work, and for my house, there is this tiny feeling of uncertainty that I might go out and I might be the source, of infection to my own family. So there is that um, tiny fear or whatever that you carry along. And when you come back home, you have certain symptoms. I had a cold, about a month or so back, and for any tiny scratch in my ear, in my throat, I'm thinking, could it be this? Could it be that? Have I come in contact with anyone? So even for me, who is not suffering from anxiety or depression, there is that sense of uncertainty, this fear of anything can happen, that I carry around. Talk more of a person who is suffering already from anxiety and or depression. Right now, it is a time that their symptoms are exacerbated. Now, you can imagine someone who has obsessive compulsive disorder. I described it earlier on. Maybe the person has obsessions about jam, and a psychologist has been working with this person, trying to do what we call desensitization, and then helping the person not to respond to the thought and the obsession, telling the person you must not all wash your hands. Then suddenly WHO are telling us to wash our hands everywhere, and you go to supermarkets and you are washing your hands, you go here, you're washing your hands. It becomes all confusing to a person with obsessive compulsive disorder. People living with anxiety and depression are having increase in their attacks, increase in episodes, more severe episodes, because the fear is real even to everybody. And then, unfortunately, for this set of people, they might not be able to have their therapists, their doctors as they want to. Because right now, in the hospital where I work, we are limiting even people's exposure to the hospital. So, unless you have a serious emergency, we advise people stay away, get your medications from pharmacies, and continue to take them. People are even afraid to come to the hospital. For fear of contracting the virus. And so they are left to suffer. And so this is the time that I think all of us need to rally around. If you know anybody that is suffering from anxiety, depression, or has had a period, a time where he or she suffered with anxiety or depression, please become a routine. When we ask ourselves, our neighbors, our friends, how are you? And people just answer fine. Saying I am fine does not necessarily mean I am fine. We have been conditioned as Africans to just answer fine to greetings. But a person who tells you fine might actually be feeling rejected. He might actually be angry. He might actually be hopeless. He might actually be feeling very lost. So it is time that we don't just, for our friends and family who we think are going through stuff, this is the time not to just accept fine and leave it at that. If a person says he is fine and we suspect that he is not fine, please go ahead. A lot of times in my clinic, I have asked people, how are you? And they say they are fine. And then I will ask again, now tell me, how are you? And then they begin to talk. You discover that they were not really fine. So let us also learn to listen to what people are not saying. A lot of times we listen to what people are saying, but we are not thinking about what they are not saying. A lot of times what people are not telling us is louder than what they are telling us. And so we need to look at people's body language, look at people's facial expression, look at them in their totality. How is this person relating to me, to the children, to people around? What has changed about this person? Because sometimes even the change for the better can be a sign that a depressed person has suddenly gotten suicidal. So somebody who is aggressive, somebody who is usually irritable and loud, suddenly becomes withdrawn and very nice. It might actually be his final appearance, final act, because he or she wants you to have a kind of a good memory about him or she when they are gone. And so they behave like that. So let us learn beyond listening to what people are saying to what they are not saying. Let us learn, a lot of times we complain about our government not giving food, palliatives, and co. But I am a firm believer in what we can do for ourselves. You know your neighbors, you know what they do. You know probably what some of the challenges they pass through. It is not out of place to, in a nice socially distant way, to give them something, share with them. It improves your own mental health. It also might be a savior, to them. So let us also let's be sensitive. Let's talk. Let us deal with one another in the sense of being kind and nice. Then it is also important to try and stay connected to friends and family. Don't ever assume that people are doing well. Don't assume. Ask people how they are coping with the lockdown. Ask people how they feel not being able to go out. I have parents-in-law who are alive, and my mother-in-law recently has really been having symptoms that she has not had before. And at some point, I had to tell my husband, I think mommy is going through some anxiety. And I had to last week confront her with it directly. I said, I think you're being fearful. And when I said that, it was shocking even to me that she opened up and said, yeah, she had some dream some years ago that her heart burst into two, and she thinks that it is going to happen now. And so I was able to help her. We didn't have to place her on medication, but just talking about it. We spoke with her a few days ago, and she told me she's totally fine. So we don't need to assume that everyone is doing fine. Let's ask how
Doctor,
they are doing.
I'll have to cut you short again.
Yeah,
I think
it's okay.
time is
It's
for Said, so I'll have to cut you short there. But just hold on, because I know there are people who are having questions that you'll be answering too. So before we get the questions and answers, I can see Pauline is ready. Pauline, you had something for us, and I'm only giving you a minute to do that. So go ahead in 1 minute and tell us what you had for us today. Unmute, Pauline. Unmute your mic. Okay.
Thank you, Bellas. And thank you, Dr. Boyatyung. It's been a nice engagement and conversation, listening to all the ideas about the depression and anxiety as the doctor has been sharing. And I think she has shared a lot about depression and anxiety, and more about during this period of COVID-19. And maybe just to add and to concur with what she said, something that we need to consider is the idea of focusing on ourselves, and also looking into the prevention, how we can prevent ourselves from getting this depression, or how we can assist other people not to fall into this problem of depression or anxiety. And something to add is about that during this time, yes, most of the people are at home. We could be doing like similar activities and routines, but as a way to reduce the chances of one getting depressed, I can add that we need to consider our routines. Sometimes you can be like having one routine for a day, which is like continuous every day. And these are some of the recipes that can affect us and lead us into getting depression. So I've also looked into that, and I think as a way to prevent this depression or anxiety, it's good to look into our daily routines and have a variety of activities that can help us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pauline. I don't know if Amy, Sydney, and Maureen are in. Tafi, can you see them? I'm trying to check, but I'm not seeing any of them.
No,
Amy,
I just received apologies from 3. They're missing in action, but they'll be presenting next week.
it's okay.
Yeah.
Then now we'll go straight to question and answer. Anybody who has any question that they would like to ask, because we are winding up before time elapses. If you have a question, now it's your time. Just raise your.
Yes, Belly, I'm here.
Okay, Shiko, go ahead and ask your question or make any comment.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank Daktari. That was a very nice discussion, very informative. We've all learned something. Yeah, about depression and anxiety, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. Also, my question is, what factors will determine how fast will somebody come out of depression or anxiety?
Okay, thank you. I know Daktari has noted that. Any other person with a question? Nancy, do you have any question? Damaris?
Yeah, I have a question to the doctor. I just want to know, like, what's the difference between depression and bipolar?
Okay, the difference between depression and bipolar. All right, I know we'll tackle that. Any other person? Okay.
Oh, Bailey, I can see Richard is raising his hand.
Yes, Richard.
Thank you very much. I have 3 questions.
Yeah.
First of all, I would like to thank the doctor who has explained a lot. And my first question is, can overweight cause depression? If somebody is overweight, can it cause depression? Number 2, is there any relationship between depression and stress? And number 3, can we use the stress table to measure depression? We use a stress table to measure depression. Those are my questions. And if I don't know whether you can allow me to share with you a screen on, I think, two aspects about that stress table, which I'm talking about, so that those who can screen or can screenshot for their own personal use. I don't know whether it is allowed or not, but if it's allowed.
I think we'll be doing stress management in 2 weeks. So we can have Richard share that over that time. Because of course, I know Dr. Botsium is going to share something about the relation between stress and depression. But of course, we will have a whole session like this one on stress management and stress techniques and what stress is. So I think during that time, Richard, we can have to discuss that over that period. But today we're just handling depression and anxiety, but I believe she's going to give a comment on that, if you can allow, because of time.
Okay, thank you very much.
See, Doctor, you can take over. Were you noting the questions, or I can read them to you again? Dr. Batsum? Hello? Is Doctor there?
Yes, I'm here.
Did you not? Or I can read them?
I noted that.
All right.
And I was trying to actually get someone sent their question by typing. I was trying to get that when. So please just help us note there are some few questions on the chat.
Okay,
as I talk about this. So
all right.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for the questions. At least it showed that I wasn't talking to myself. Thank you very much. I was also a bit worried about my accent, wondering whether you would be able to follow me, but it seems we were on the same page. So thank you. How fast can someone come out of anxiety and depression if there are some factors? Yes. Now, usually there are individual differences in response, either to medication, to psychotherapy, because of several things. There are some of them that we have not been able to really find out, or we have not yet understood the differences, because some people respond to things faster than others. Now, if a person, but some of the things that I have seen is that if a person is open-minded and ready to deal with stuff and learn, you know, the person tends to do better with psychotherapy than a person who is set in his own ways, and you try bringing out these are your problems, the person just would not follow you. The other thing that is very important in recovery from depression is having psychosocial support. People who have good psychosocial support from family, from friends, you know, tend to do better than those without psychosocial support. Those who have a good premorbid functioning, meaning before the illness, they had good functioning. So the person has a good relationship with people. The person probably has a job. If the person is of age, has a family which is functional, you know, the person tends to recover better and faster from depression than a person who does not have a good adjustment before the illness. Now, also getting the right help matters, because the way depression and most mental illnesses are is that, you know, beyond the things, our perceptions and our relationships and our environment. I tried to explain earlier on that, you know, there are distinct illnesses because there are things also happening at the level of the brain. There are neurochemical changes. There are changes at cellular levels. So if a person gets the right help, some of these, and early enough, some of these damages has not yet taken place. But if a person does not get the right help and keep having relapses and getting better, relapses and getting better, there is actually damages that are done to the brain. And that's why you see that sometimes when you have a person that has had mental illness for a very long time, it appears as if the person has changed completely, the person can begin to, even though has recovered from the depression or whatever illness, the person finds it difficult to integrate in the society. The person maybe suffers with long-standing forgetfulness, or is not able to function as intellectually capable as the person was before the illness. So these are things that could contribute to whether a person gets well fast or not. So the difference between depression and bipolar affective disorder. Now, depression and bipolar affective disorders are both mood disorders. Mood disorders in the sense that they affect the way we feel primarily. Now, when a person has bipolar affective disorder, it is usually more than one episode of the illness. And it is usually that the person has, let's assume, depression now, and then the depression got taken care of and the person is well, and then later on the person comes down with mania. Now mania is the opposite of depression. That is when a person has increased energy, elated mood, the person is happy for no reason or inadequate reason, or the person is excited, elated, sometimes in a state of bliss. The person is very impulsive, the person is overgenerous, the person is grandiose, believing that things that are out of this world in either his ability or his person. The person very maybe rash. Whatever he thinks about, he is doing. He believes he is the president of Kenya. Now, a person can swing from mania to depression. After a while, breaks down again with mania. Or the person comes down with either hypomania. Hypomania is a milder form of mania that does not affect functioning. I don't know if you have ever come in contact with individuals that you notice they are a little bit hyper. They are very happy. They are not sleeping very well. They are hyper efficient for a period of time. That is hypomania. It doesn't really affect such people will be able to walk and function normally. Then after a while, they break down with mania. It is also bipolar. So when you have either depression mania, hypomania, mania, mania, and hypomania, you call it bipolar. But if you have depression, you get better, and then later come down with depression, that is not bipolar. That is what we call recurrent depression. And the management is a little bit different, because when a person has bipolar, apart from you don't, if a person has bipolar and he is coming down with depression as a phase of his bipolar illness, you don't treat him as you would to a normally depressive patient, because sometimes giving those patients antidepressants can tip them to the manic phase. So their management, even medically, is a little bit different. And then people that have bipolar affective disorders tend to have more frequent illnesses than those that have just depression. I hope I've been able to shed a little light on that. Then looking at overweight and depression, yes, overweight can cause depression in several ways. Now, being overweight is not really so good for a person's health overall, whether it's the physical health or the mental health. Now, people that are overweight tend to have some, are more likely to have some body image issues, which can be very stressful to them. Sometimes the way people view them, the way people talk to them, the way people compare themselves with them, can be so overwhelming that it can tip them to depression. Now, apart from that, people that are overweight tend to have more physical health comorbidities, things like diabetes, hypertension, arthritis, chronic diseases generally is more, even infertility, is associated with being overweight. And there is a direct link between chronic medical illnesses and depression. So that's another way that overweight can lead to depression. Also, people that are overweight actually have an increased level of stress hormone. There is a neurochemical, we call them cortisol, it tends to be higher in those that are overweight, and cortisol also is directly linked to depression. So those are some of the ways that overweight can be linked with depression. And sometimes, even for those who are overweight, the act of trying to lose weight, these days there are a lot of weight loss groups, support, well, they tend to be support groups, but, I'm in a few of them just to see what is going on. And I discovered that after a while, life becomes competition on those blogs. Everybody is brandishing how he lost 10 kg, 5 kg in 2 weeks. And then this one is struggling, trying to lose 1 kg, and it's not possible. The person can begin to think, is something wrong with me? Am I a failure? And, if care is not taken, the person can come down with depression. Then depression and stress, yes. In fact, depression is one of the mental illnesses that has to do a lot with stress. In fact, there is what is called, in mental health, there is what we call vulnerability stress diastasis, meaning that even if you are vulnerable, maybe by means of your genetics, you have a family history of depression. If you have the right environment, if the stress in your life is taken care of and managed well, you will most likely not come down with depression. And a person who has no vulnerability, encountered with adequate stress, can come down with depression. So depression is one illness that the environmental factors play a key role, even greater than the genetics. When you talk about things like schizophrenia, eating disorders, and co, those ones take the genetics and the vulnerability plays a higher role than even the environmental stressors. However, in depression, environmental stressors actually play more role than even the genetics. And so, yes, stress and depression are very closely linked. Everybody has a stress threshold. And permit me to use a little of your time to explain something. I don't know, for those of us that did science, there is this experiment we always do in physics about the spring, and you keep adding weight to a spring. If you add weight to a spring that is flexible, it stretches, and then you remove the weight, it bounces back. You add more weight, it stretches, bounces back. You keep adding weight, it stretches and bounces back. But then a time comes that when you add a certain weight to the weight that you have been adding before, this string either gets deformed or it gets broken. And that's exactly the way the human mind functions. And the interesting thing about the weight that eventually breaks the spring is that it is usually lighter than all the weight that the spring had carried. And so everybody has, permit me to use the word, elastic limits that is said in physics, and a breaking point. And stress, it's usually additive. So when you see a person breaking down because of maybe he or she loses a parent, actually the loss of the parents is actually a tipping point to the person. But the person has been going through distress for quite a while, and the person has been maladjusting. It's just that this just served as a tipping point for the person. So stress can be a little bit dynamic, because it is not what happens to you that is important. It's the interpretation that you give to what happens to you that is important to you in life. That is what determines whether an event will be stressful to you or not. So that you failed an exam is not the problem. It's the meaning that you give to failing an exam that determines whether it's going to be a problem or not. And then the stress table. Stress table might give you, it's very helpful in dealing with depression. It's also very helpful probably in grading the severity of depression, but it will not be a direct measure of this making a diagnosis of depression. But yes, I agree, it's going to help to probably get the issues that bother a person, and then to be able to say that, okay, this person is most likely severely depressed, this person is most likely moderately depressed, based on what I see happening on the person's stress table. And I'm glad that after this discussion, more is going to be discussed about it, so I would leave it at there. Then I got two of the questions that were typed. So let me just attempt to address a few of them. Now, difference between OCD and hypochondriasis. Now, OCD is more of an anxiety disorder. Hypochondriasis is it might also be an anxiety disorder, but then in hypochondriasis, a person is worried or a person is unduly concerned about bodily symptoms and believing that he or she has something that is wrong with him or her or has a particular disease. An example of hypochondriasis would be that a person thinks that he has risky your will. But okay, sorry for the interruption. Hello, sorry for that interruption. Now, in obsessive compulsive disorder, what happens is that there is a repetitive thought that is intrusive coming through a person's mind, and then this generates a lot of anxiety, and the person performs rituals to help ease the anxiety. So an example would be somebody that is obsessed with getting infected with germs, or somebody that has recurrent thoughts of contamination. Now, washing the hands in a ritual, or somebody that is obsessed with order, having to arrange things, in exactly from the smallest to the biggest, or from the biggest to the smallest, or somebody having obsessional doubts and is not able to leave his house because he has to check, in and out to be sure that he has not forgotten to switch off his light. That is, and then if this is affecting functioning, you say it's obsessive compulsive disorder. Hypochondriasis sometimes can reach delusional intensity. When a person has hypochondriasis, usually you are able to talk with the person, reason with the person, tell the person, oh, I don't think you have HIV, and you can alleviate the person's anxiety. But after a while, doubt sets in, and then the person begins to think about that again. But when it reaches a point that the person firmly believes that he has a particular illness, whether it's cancer, HIV, corona, or whatever it is, and you cannot reason with the person, it has become a hypochondriacal delusion. So we need to also have a distinction, between hypochondriasis and hypochondriacal delusion. In hypochondriasis, you can reason with the person that is having this problem. It's not up to a delusional intensity. But when the person holds on to the belief that he has that disease, regardless of reason, it is now a hypochondriacal delusion, which might be part of other illnesses like schizophrenia and depression. Somebody asked, well, I didn't get the next question, so I need help.
So the last that she was asking how to deal with the anxiety caused by chronic procrastination.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if the person has anxiety and is caused by chronic procrastination, I think that the person, and if the person really knows that it's chronic procrastination that is his or her problem, then I think the person's problem is half solved. Deal with procrastination. Unfortunately, there are people whom to deal with this chronic procrastination, they must actually see a therapist. They might need to see a psychologist, because it might be, if it's something that is chronic and the person has done everything he or she can and has not been able to deal with it, then I suggest that the person sees a therapist. The person can sometimes what manifests as procrastination might actually be a symptom of something deeper. Some insecurity, some inferiority complex, some problems with feeling the need for acceptance. They can all manifest as procrastination. So sometimes the person who is affected might think that his or her own problem is just procrastination, but the problem might be deeper than procrastination. And sometimes it might require a psychiatrist or a psychologist talking with the person to see that the deeper problem, is not just the procrastination, but procrastination is coming out as a symptom of an underlying thing which needs to be addressed. And if you just look at it as just procrastination and you take care of the procrastination, it might manifest in other forms. So if it is really that is procrastination, dealing with the procrastination, which is beyond the scope of this talk, is what the person would need to do. But oftentimes, there are more underlying issues than just procrastination, which the person isn't aware of, but it's the responsibility of either a psychiatrist or a psychologist to be able to bring out this insecure feeling and deal with them. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Doctor. It has been an amazing discussion and we've really learned a lot from you. I hope we'll still learn more. This discussion has not ended. There are several questions that I know we'll ask. There are several things we still need. And I know we'll be bringing you on board to answer these questions. To everybody, you have been an amazing team. And thanks so much for staying with us up to this moment. We do appreciate your patience. We do appreciate the fact that you listened through. You've asked questions. It's only that time is out and we may not allow anybody to comment further. So thank you so much. Feel appreciated. And I know we are not going to stop the conversation here. We have our Facebook page, our Twitter, and even Instagram and our WhatsApp page. If you've not been added to our WhatsApp group, kindly leave your number or contact Aflin Tafi. Will be able to add you and we'll continue with the conversation over there. In case you need any help or you have a friend who needs help, we are always there to help. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Biatium Gang, and everybody else. And the pronunciation is kind of difficult, but we'll get
Oh,
used
you're
to it.
doing well. You're doing well. Thank you.
Thank you. So Tafi, I hand over to you before you give us the closing remarks. Tafi,
All right.
give
Yeah, Belly, I'm here.
Yeah.
It also took me a while to know Dr. Botsium. So that's her name, Dr. Botsium. Thank you very much, Daktari, for having been a part of this. We thank you very much. And for the initiative that you're doing for Nigeria, we appreciate. And of course, we love you so much. So anyone who's not in the group, just as Belly has said, there's a link that we have sent. So you can copy it and join right now or contact me later so that we can add you to the group. Next week, we are doing an interesting conversation. We are doing mental health amongst the youths and the teenagers. It's going to be awesome. You don't want to miss this one. So make sure you start preparing your calendar. At 8 p.m. we will be doing mental health conversations with the youths and the teenagers. So there'll be lots of sharing going on. If you have a younger brother, you make sure you have them on board for this conversation. If you have a younger sister, also ensure that you have them on board, because we just want to get what the youths are saying about this and also have them on board for the same conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. Botsium. Thank you, Pauline Moda, for having turned up today. We appreciate you. And for the whole team that didn't make it, Daniela Mireri has just joined in right now. Too bad. She'll be sharing what the youths have got next week. And we'll have an interesting conversation. Asante Sana, Nancy, Ruth Ogando, our secretary, Asante, Nixon Kipkorir, Richard Shemuchuk, George Reru, Damaris Yage, and Chelal. We all appreciate Belly for your efforts and moderation. That was perfect. Next time we'll be doing the sign language interpretation, and forgive my lighting. Nimeona message. Someone has just told me the lighting was bad. We really apologize for that. We'll try and make it better next time. Thank you very much. And now you're at liberty to leave. Asanteni sana.
Thank you so much.
Sorry. And bye.
All right, bye. See you on Sunday.
Thank you. See you. See you.
Bye.
All right, bye.
See you next week.
All right, bye. See you guys.
Lovely.
Um,